What's up, guys? It's Ben with 2020 election predictions. And in today's video, I'm going to look at the Senate matchups in 2016 and how they compared to the presidential matchups in 2016. 2016 was a very unique year, and it was the first year where all these states on the presidential level went to the same party as they went on the Senate level. So all the states that Donald Trump went Republican on the Senate level, and all the states that Hillary Clinton went Democratic on the Senate level. This is the first time it's ever happened, and it was very, very surprising. And it has demonstrated a shift in our politics. Our politics have become more polarized, and less people are willing to do split tickets on their ballots. And before I get into the video, I just want to remind y'all, I'm really trying to grow my channel right now. I've made 43 videos, which is a lot of content. And I'm still trying to do more and more, doing one video every day. And right now I'm at 608 subscribers. I'm really trying to get to that 1,000 goal, especially probably by mid July. And I'm going to be doing a video every day until I hit that. So please subscribe if you haven't, and give this video a like. And also, if you're already subscribed, hit the bell notification by the subscribe button so you can get notified whenever I post a video. So anyway, let's look at the 538 forecast and look at the states where they got wrong. So obviously it was Florida, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. So those were the 5 states that people were pretty uniformly projecting wrong that ended up going to Donald Trump. And then let's look at the Senate forecast. It was probably less wrong, but 2 of the main states that they got wrong were Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. But it's really interesting to see like how the different shades are in both these forecasts. So like a state like Missouri, I mean, they definitely knew that they were going to go to Donald Trump. But on the Senate level, they're like, hey, I mean, Jason Kander definitely has a chance of winning, even though Roy Blunt is the incumbent. And if we look at the Senate results in Missouri, look, Donald Trump or Roy Blunt only won the state by 3 points at the end of the day. And Donald Trump won the state by almost 20 points, I think 18 and a half points. So there definitely are people who are doing split ballot voting. And looking at the results from the past presidential election, it seems that people seem to be more polarized on the presidential level. So there isn't as much movement on the presidential level as is on the Senate level, because like certain senators are just really popular from the state. Senators can be more moderate and more maybe can appeal more to the people in the state. But on the presidential level, you don't really see a lot of like radically different presidents. I mean, I think Donald Trump would definitely be the exception to kind of reform politics a lot. But typically, the party and the primary voters try to choose more of a mainstream guy as president, and there isn't much movement in states. I mean, in 2016, you can kind of throw that all out the window because Donald Trump did have a certain appeal to the Rust Belt, and it ended up having him win the Electoral College. But generally speaking, the president's the voters are more locked in whether they're going to vote Republican or Democrat on the presidential level rather than on the Senate level. And then in other videos, I've talked about how on the governor's level, it's even more. So people are more willing to like switch over to other parties like in state elections, and then also in the Senate election more than the presidential election. So let's just dive right in to this video. So Wisconsin was a state that both at the Senate and on the presidential level was projected to go towards the Democrats. So you could argue that Ron Johnson and his come from behind victory helped Donald Trump win the state just because people are going to try to vote for the same party. They're doing less split ticket voting. Or you can just argue that Donald Trump had a specific appeal, and people that already were voting for Ron Johnson were going to vote for him again. And, of course, there could be some videos that voted for Ron Johnson and Hillary Clinton, or voted for Donald Trump and Russ Feingold. I mean, we really don't know. But I think having that, I think Donald Trump definitely encouraged turnout among those who don't normally vote, kind of the white working class people who maybe weren't as motivated to vote for Mitt Romney. But those people who maybe like didn't really care as much about the Senate election would vote for Ron Johnson because he had the R by the name. And it's pretty interesting. So Ron Johnson actually outperformed Donald Trump by a significant margin. I think it definitely helps that he was the incumbent in this race. Donald Trump obviously was not the incumbent. So people were probably more familiar with Ron Johnson, this Russ Feingold, and that name recognition could have just helped him overall. We see Donald Trump won this state by about 0.7 percentage points and about like 20,000 raw votes. And you see on the Senate level that Ron Johnson almost won by 100,000 votes. And so one other state that both at the Senate and the Senate and the presidential election got wrong was the state of Pennsylvania. Pat Toomey was the incumbent too. There's a lot of polls coming out here that had him losing to Katie McGinney, who's the challenger. But at the end of the day, Pat Toomey actually had a higher margin than Donald Trump won the presidency by. And one thing that's really interesting with the senators is that they're elected every 6 years. So all of these incumbents in the so Pat Toomey was the incumbent, Ron Johnson was the incumbent, and even in Illinois, which is a very dark blue state, Mark Kirk was the incumbent. It was because all these elections happened in 2010, which was a Republican wave year. Remember, the Tea Party was resurging, and there was not a huge amount of turnout among Democrats in the 2010 elections. And I think that the reason that Ron Johnson and Pat Toomey were able to keep their seats is because it was in 2016. If these two senators were trying to defend their states in 2018, a completely different political climate, it was a Democratic wave year, I really don't think they would have been able to keep their seats. But then we also look at a state like Missouri, which Roy Blunt was maybe could have lost this state, but I definitely think he rode Donald Trump's coattails, same with Todd Young, and maybe even someone like Richard Burr, even though I think Richard Burr he might have even won this state by a greater margin than Donald Trump. But definitely in Indiana, which Todd Young ended up winning by 10 points, and Roy Blunt ended up winning by 3 points, they definitely rode Donald Trump's coattails. And this is evidence that people are not as polarized as maybe that we portray them in the media. There definitely are a certain population that's always going to vote Republican or always going to vote Democrat down the ballot, and we're seeing more of that. But there still are those independent voters who are willing to be persuaded, and these are the voters that presidential campaigns and Senate campaigns focus on the most, because that's where they're getting the bang out of their buck on their campaign ads. I mean, it's pointless to spend a bunch of money on campaign ads that only people who already know who they're going to vote for are watching. So these are the voters that you can convince maybe let's go Republican or let's go Democrat on this ticket. Going into the 2020 election, I think it is very possible that we have the same outcome, but the implications will be massive. So there's certain states like Arizona where the Democrat is leading Mark Kelly in the Senate election, but it's considered a pure toss-up on the presidential level. But if Mark Kelly might help Joe Biden, and that is very significant. If it's the same pattern as 2020, which is increasingly becoming like that, the margins between the Senate and the presidential level are becoming closer, then that's going to be bad news for Donald Trump in a state like Arizona. And it would be bad news for Susan Collins in a state like Maine. Maybe it would help Tom Tillis in North Carolina, but really it could go either way in some of these states. And I expect the Senate elections and the presidential elections to be pretty close. The last state that I want to focus on is the state of New Hampshire. So this is a state, I think going into the election day, it was kind of the closest state on the 538 model, and it ended up being the closest state on the Senate level and on the presidential level in terms of raw votes. So Kelly Ayotte was the incumbent Republican senator, and it was very interesting. So she was not a huge fan of Donald Trump. She spoke out against him in the primaries, but as it came to election day, she was playing this game of cat and mouse, kind of saying well, I might vote for Donald Trump, but I don't really support him. And it was very hard because Kelly Ayotte was fairly popular in the state of New Hampshire. I mean, New Hampshire is a state that typically moves or is blue, but she got elected by a significant margin in the 2010 Tea Party wave election year. This is a state where I think that Donald Trump potentially could have damaged her a little bit. Donald Trump almost won the state too. Look, I mean, it was as close as can be. He lost by 0.3% of the votes. He lost by about a little less than 3,000 votes. But if we look at the Senate election, it's interesting. There's more raw votes, so less people voted third party because there wasn't a strong independent candidate. You could argue that Gary Johnson or maybe Jill Stein took some votes away. But she lost by just over 1,000 votes, Kelly Ayotte, and by 0.1% of the population. And a lot of Republicans were really angry because they thought this was a seat that they could have held on to. But still, they only lost 2 seats overall, and they won races in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania that they thought they were going to lose. And I think Donald Trump helped, being on the top of the ballot, helped them win these states. If Mitt Romney was on the top of the ticket, I honestly think that these states on the Senate level could have gone blue. But potentially, if Mitt Romney was on the top of the ballot, then he could have kept New Hampshire. These are a lot of different states, and they're different demographics for sure. So, all right, I hope y'all like my video. In my next video, I'll look on the implications of this pattern on 2020 and even in 2024, because this pattern is very interesting. I feel like a lot of people didn't focus on that because the headline was, oh, Donald Trump won. But the Senate is very, very important, as we saw like in the Kavanaugh voting hearings. I mean, the Senate is incredibly important. And definitely in 2020, the main focus, all the headlines will be Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But you have a lot of vulnerable Republican senators and even some Democratic senators, like the one in Michigan and Doug Jones. But the biggest Senate races that we'll be focusing on will definitely be Arizona, Maine, and New Hampshire, and maybe even some others like the one in Montana with Steve Daines. But going forward, I think this pattern is going to be very interesting, and I will be very interested in looking at the results to see how many people actually split their ballot, because I do not think it's that much. As younger voters are coming up, I think they're less willing to split their ticket, which I think is not a good pattern for U.S. democracy, because it'll be less at looking at the character of the individual and more of kind of the party that they align with. But we will see this going forward. So please check out the video tomorrow, and please subscribe here if you haven't, and turn on bell notifications, and give this video a like, and please comment on what you thought on this video. And I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks, guys.